Well, welcome to our See Hear Love SOS Summer of Strength series. I'm your host, Melinda Estabrooks. And this series, our conversations, are here to help encourage you and strengthen you in your journey through the changing seasons. And so we're so glad you're here. And I hope you'll be strengthened after this episode and during with my very inspiring guest, Jasmine Duckworth. Welcome, Jasmine. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Jasmine Duckworth, for our listeners, has been serving with Karis Disability Services, formerly Christian Horizons, since 2004, and has been disabled herself since 2015. Jasmine often speaks with churches and community groups about disability, accessibility, and ableism, and she works closely with self-advocates as they work to make the world more accessible. She is a mom, wife, and obsessive knitter. What are you knitting currently,
I'm
Jasmine?
about to start a sweater. I have all the yarn sitting in a pile, and I'm going to start it later today.
I have such great appreciation for that. One of my girlfriends 2 years ago, made me a sweater, like a bulky black sweater with big buttons. I love it. It's like a hug every time I wear it.
Exactly.
And,
I feel like knitting is tangible love.
oh, okay.
I love to give away my knitting.
Really? That's a byline for a little like knitting store, knitting like Etsy kind of thing, you know? Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, welcome back. And I say back, and I'll get into that a little bit more of why you're back and seeing you again. But Jasmine, this is our Summer of Strength series. Over the summer, we have more space for a lot of us to just sort of chill and listen. And so this series comes because usually in the summer, as people are at the cottage or on vacation, they love listening to inspiring conversations. And so as we think about Summer of Strength, where we strengthen our audience in different areas of their emotional, physical, spiritual, mental needs, what areas would you say, or just one area, this is where we just sort of go really like vulnerable really fast, where would you say you need strengthening in currently?
Probably like work-life balance and not allowing myself to get overwhelmed. And when I get overwhelmed, I jump right to angry, which is not good for anyone. So I love the prayer of St. Francis, where it talks about where there's hatred, let me sow love, where there's injury, pardon. And I love praying that to kind of weed all the bad things out of my own heart and sow the good seeds so that God can do a good work in me, and then hopefully I can do a good work in the world. So that is what I've been coming back to lately to try to help me with, just not getting so inflamed with minor things and making sure that I am, bringing love, channeling God's love into the world.
It's good. Now, do you have an issue with like saying no or saying yes or boundaries? I mean, I say this because that's me. So
I have a hard time saying no, for sure.
Okay.
And because everything is so good, right? Like everything comes up and it's such a good opportunity. I'm like, well, I can't say no to that. I want to do that.
I hear you. I have FOMO, and I love saying yes. I'm like, oh, there's opportunities. I'm kind of like, today seize the day. You never know. Wow. I'm kind of that. My husband's like, no. I'm like, what if he goes, no? Like, it's like, how do you just do that? He's like, no. I'm like, Chris.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I can't do that either. That's a good one. I think a lot of us struggle with that. I've had a lot of conversations with girlfriends who, like, the no is really powerful. Powerful for you, but also those around you. Because when you demonstrate and model the no, it actually empowers others to go, oh, I actually have permission as well to say no. Because I see Jasmine and Melinda saying it, and I see that their life is thriving or flourishing or robust, and it doesn't feel like they're missing out. So, okay. And I've seen that where it's like sort of this community group think or response when I've said something, they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I can say no and stay home tonight too. I'm like, oh. So no, that's good. That's a good one for even me as I'm thinking as you're saying that. I'm like, yeah, I need to be strengthened in that area too. Mine, Jasmine, is this is actually really open and vulnerable. I wasn't quite sure, and I was talking to my husband about it. He's like, well, go for it. I said, well, it's having tough and crucial conversations with people. So we did a show on this last season because I needed some help on this, and I still struggle with this because I don't like confrontation and I don't like conflict. and I have a
Same.
bit of sprinkled in people pleasing and all that kind of thing. So I've noticed more and more that I avoid conflict. There's a bit of family of origin ways my, parents dealt or didn't deal with conflict and how they did that. And I know which isn't healthy. And so I know it's important to have tough conversations when someone is out of line or has hurt or offended me. And I don't know why I'm afraid, because if you speak in love and truth, Jasmine, it's like, then it's good. And no matter how they respond, you have come fully in truth and love, humility and grace. It's still tough. I still need to be strengthened in that area, because what I sort of have this block is that when you have the tough and loving conversation, it's actually the loving thing to do for that other person. Right? Because then they're learning, and then oh, I didn't know, or it gives them opportunity to explain so that it doesn't kind of get out of control and we're down the line and it's been a mess. But I got to just be better at it. So
I feel like that's one that a lot of us can relate to as well.
yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah,
I have the same struggle. It's so much easier just to kind of keep moving and hope. I think hope that everything is okay and will be okay, but sometimes
yeah.
you do need to like get into it, which is
I
so
know.
hard.
It is hard, because I think part of it is like the people pleasing side of me, where it's like, well, if I say this, it's going to offend them. They're going to be mad at me. Then they're not going to like me. And yet, as I've gotten older and in this world and place in my life, it's like some of the best hard conversations that were shared with me helped change me. Character, learning about myself, becoming a better woman. And somebody risked to have those conversations with me. And I know it was hard for them. I know it was so hard, because some of them came and said, Mal, this is so hard, but I want to just identify this. If it's not true, then, and a lot of times it was true. And I was grateful that somebody was brave enough and risked to be loving to tell me. So anyway, that's my area this summer to be strengthened. So we've got saying no and having tough and crucial conversations. Okay. Well, we're done the podcast, Jasmine. We've all right.
Yeah,
we're
that's
good.
enough to work on.
Exactly. Let's just go. Let's just end this and let me go away and kind of like figure how to do this.
Put it into practice.
I know. Well, Jasmine, it was wonderful having you as a speaker at our 2024 International Women's Day event. I love that you shared your story, and you were like the highlight. And I so appreciated your openness and willing to share. And so much that I just had to have you come back and be with us on See Her Love so more people can listen and learn from you. And I remember chatting with you, Jasmine, prior to our event about why I wanted you to come. Remember that? Like I had some angst, and I was feeling uptight and comfortable about my lack of understanding and connection with people with disabilities, and you graciously listened to me. And so here we are again. The thing is, we didn't record you sharing at the International Women's Day event. And a lot of people after were like, you should have recorded her. And I'm like, well, I guess I just have to have her back on a podcast conversation. And so here we are. I'm thrilled to have you back. And so let's start. So I want to get to your story, but this is also going to be information for people, because the things you're going to share are going to be, first time things. People are going to be like, wow, I'd never knew this. But one of the biggest things, and I was sharing with this, with others and with you, was people's fear, lack of understanding about the language we use around disability. And because of that, which is really wild, then we don't engage. Then we're like, well, we don't know what to say if we offend. So because of that, then I will not engage. I will not speak. I won't even say anything, because I don't want to offend, because I don't have the right words.
Yeah, we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing, putting our foot in our mouth, being politically incorrect, offending somebody, that we miss out on these awesome opportunities to get to know people. So I always say, like, it's better to say something and maybe say the wrong thing, but to have started the connection than to miss out on it altogether because you're afraid of messing up. Like, to mess up is human. We all make mistakes. And if people can understand the heart and the intent of why you're trying to reach out and make that connection and talk to them, they're usually going to be understanding and forgiving, and they can help you learn the right terminology. But I can give some
Yeah, be great.
background to kind of help. So a lot of people worry, like, what is the language? Do we say people with disabilities? Do we say disabled people? Do we say differently abled? Do we say something else? And you're going to hear all different examples from whoever you talk to, but the two like major ones that are preferred in the disability community is either what we call person first language or identity first language. And person first language would be people with disabilities, a person who uses a wheelchair, a person with Down syndrome. So that's person first language. And the people who prefer that would usually say, it's because I am a person first and I don't want my disability to define me. I want you to see me. And then also recognize that, yeah, I have a disability. That is a part of who I am, but it's not totally me. So I want the person first because I want to be treated like a full person. So that would be person first language. You see that a lot in the communities of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They tend to prefer person first language because they are still struggling to be treated as full people. And so because there's a lot of ableism and a lot of misunderstanding about people with intellectual disabilities, particularly adults with intellectual disabilities. They're often infantilized. And so they tend to prefer the person first because they're still advocating for their full personhood and acceptance in society. And I work with a lot of people with developmental disabilities, and this is what I hear from them. And then the other side would be identity first language. That would be disabled people, autistic people, deaf people. And you see that a lot in the autistic community, in the deaf community, and just the general disability population. And that's where people would say, I'm proud of my disability or my diagnosis, and I'm absolutely comfortable with integrating that as part of my identity. I don't need to make it a separate thing from who I am. It can be a core identifier when I describe myself. And so I am comfortable, like I have disabilities and I'm comfortable with both. I will refer to myself as a disabled person the same way I'll refer to myself as a Canadian or as a woman. I don't have to say I'm a person who lives in Canada or I'm a person who is female. I'm very comfortable to take my Canadian identity, my woman identity, and integrate it into who I am and use it as an identifier. And I feel the same about disability. I'm very comfortable saying I'm a disabled person because it's not a source of shame. It can actually be a source of pride. It connects me to a community, and it impacts every aspect of my life. So when I'm speaking publicly about disability, I try to model both. And if I'm talking about the people that I work with at Karis Disability Services, I default to person first language because I know that's their preference. Okay. And if I'm talking about myself, I might use identity first language because I'm comfortable with both and I want to model that both are accepted. So if you are wanting to talk to somebody about their disability or their access needs or whatever, know that both are valid choices and just kind of follow the lead of the person you're talking to. But usually if you're trying to reach out to somebody who has a disability and start a conversation, you don't need to start by talking about the disability. You just start talking to them about like, hi, what's your name? I'm Melinda. Nice to meet you. And if there are specific questions, you could say, hey, can you get into this room? I've noticed with your wheelchair, like, and you can start talking about the specifics. Like, there's a little bit of a lip here. Do you need something? Do we have to get a ramp? Like, or if it's a blind person, you talk about like, do you need something in large print? Or is there something I can do to support? You can start talking about the specific access needs of what they need. And it doesn't have to be about, oh no, I'm going to use the wrong language, because it's more practical than that usually.
That's excellent. I wish you could share this all the time. And again, I find this in anything, Jasmine, where because we don't ask or have conversations like I'm having with you, then we don't. And then and that's really sad because then we don't engage. Like, we're so afraid to offend. And I get that in the culture in which we are now in many ways, that we then don't engage. But what I'm asking of you, now that I'm making notes, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand that. And that's not scary. I can now engage. I can say, okay, people with disabilities, don't start with a disability. Start with the, hey, as a person. And then what you said, see the specific need that they may have. Just like if I'm under 5 foot, I'm not offended when people are like, can I get that for you, Mel? like in the work kitchen because I literally can't reach it. It does not offend me because I'm like, oh, because I can't reach it, right? Like so in a way it's like, okay, I feel so encouraged by what you just said there. I think that's going to encourage quite a few people because again, it's like that's not scary. We can do this. It's just learning and knowing, asking the questions on what to say. That's excellent. I'm writing this down, and I know our listeners are. And if you are, when as you're listening, please get your pen and paper out because you're going to need. I should have said that earlier. You're going to need that because Jasmine has so much information that you need to write down. Okay, what I didn't know was the prevalence of disability in Canada. And I think for you to kind of like unpack that a little bit, because I think people just assume with disability, I'll be honest, it's somebody that you can physically see that has a challenge. But let's talk about the prevalence of disability and types of disability in Canada, kind of setting again the foundation.
Yeah, it's about 20% of Canadians live with some kind of disability.
Wow.
And the biggest type of disability is pain-related disabilities. This is according to Stats Canada. And these stats are from a few years ago, but I don't think much would have changed in the last few years.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the disabilities in Canada are pain-related, and you can't see pain, so you may not be able to see it. So a lot of disabilities are non-apparent, and so I think the bottom line when I talk about the stats, I always ask people like look around your space, your community, your workplace, whatever it is. Do you think that 20% of the people around you have disabilities? And if not, then why not? Are they not there because there are barriers? Or are they there and you don't know that they have a disability because they have non-apparent disabilities? And is that maybe because they haven't felt safe to disclose? And so then how can you be more hospitable to the disability that's already in your context? So start with the assumption that disability is here. We're here. We're in your spaces, we're in your churches, we're in your workplaces, we're in your neighborhoods. Whether you can see or not that we have a disability, we're here. And so I think sometimes people think like, well, I'll make the space accessible if somebody with a disability comes, or I'll think about disability
Yes.
when they present, when they walk through my door. But they're probably already there, right?
Yep.
So start thinking like, okay, there must be people with disabilities here. How can I be more open to that? How can I just think about that as I'm planning new things, new projects, new whatever? Let me keep that in mind.
That's so good. I will say this because what you're doing for me, Jasmine, is kind of opening up my mind to not just assume things and see myself in this space. Like again, it's me being in the world, others being in the world. What questions are we asking? How are we looking at our space? How are we seeing the needs of others? What questions are we asking? And I'm not being hard on myself, but yeah, this conversation brings up a lot in me personally of I've never thought of that. Like, if 20% Canadians, pain related disabilities, like I just sort of go about my life and never think about that or be open about that or ask questions or connect with people and ask, and just make assumptions. And so again, there's so much in this conversation about intentionality and being more and open and asking questions and being curious about those around us and looking at the needs because some of them are probably obvious and I'm just so singular focused on my own things that sometimes I miss what is going on around me and the other people around me as well.
And we all do, right? Like I've worked in the field of disabilities for over 20 years. And I felt pretty well versed and aware of disability and the issues, but it wasn't until I became disabled myself that I really became aware in a new way. And so, don't be hard on yourself. I think it's something that if it's not your experience, if it's not somebody who's like in your daily life very closely, you can't be aware of everything, right? And you only know what you know. And what do they say? As you know better, you do better. And so you just keep learning.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because sometimes I kind of like oscillate between like I'm really hard on myself and then I'm like So I think you're right. It's just again these conversations with you and me just really helpful for me as I grow and I learn, I listen, and then having the platforms that I do to ensure that others can learn and grow and be open and curious and intentional in this way. So thank you. That's really good. So Jasmine, you were have been disabled since 2015. Would love to hear your story about that, how that's and affected you and your body and your sense of self, spirit, identity. And so let's start with 2015, and then just be
Sure.
open to share about your journey.
So in 2015, I was 31. I went into the hospital for a very minor surgery, unrelated to anything else. Just like a day surgery. I was awake, not a big deal. But I came out and my vision was a little bit blurry, and which it was nothing related. It was a uterine issue, nothing to do with my eyes. So I was like, well, that's weird. So I started seeing doctors, and a couple months later, it got worse, and I was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which is it means grave muscle weakness, and it's a neuromuscular disorder that affects all of the voluntary muscles in my body, or all the skeletal muscles. So any muscle that I can choose to move is affected. So it does not affect my heart or things that are kind of automatic, but it does affect my limbs, my neck, my torso, my mouth, my eyes, my swallowing, my breathing, my blinking, my every other muscle can be affected. But it has a lot of the similar symptoms to somebody with multiple sclerosis, which more people are familiar with, but the trajectory of the disease is very different. Because in mine, the issue is with my muscles, and muscle cells can regenerate. So, whereas opposed to if the issue is with nerves are more like you can't regain when you lose your functionality. So for the first 2 years, I got progressively worse and worse and worse. And I knew that was going to happen because I have a family friend who actually is a doctor of pharmacy and works with this. And he had told me the first 2 years will be the hardest. And my health just went downhill for about 2 years, and I kept losing more and more abilities. It started my eyes, and it started affecting my mouth, and it started affecting my limbs, and it started affecting my breathing. It affected my ability to hold up my head. And so for those 2 years I was off work. I couldn't drive because I couldn't see because my vision was so bad. I had to give up all my volunteer jobs at church. I couldn't do much socializing. I became very isolated, mostly just stayed at home. My husband had to start doing pretty much all of the housework, a lot more of the childcare. Plus, he had to take care of me. I needed help to shower. I needed help to wash my hair. Sometimes I needed help to get off the toilet because I'd sit down and then I couldn't stand up because my legs wouldn't work. So I felt very isolated, very broken. The nice thing about my illness, I should say, is that the more I use a muscle, the weaker it gets until it kind of temporarily paralyzes, but it is temporary. The more I can rest the muscle, it will usually bounce back, and then I can use it again. So it's not progressively degenerative. Those first 2 years were getting worse and worse because we were trying to figure out a treatment plan. So during those 2 years, I did plasmapheresis. I did intravenous immunoglobulin infusions every month. I had a thymectomy removal, a thymus removal. I took steroids for a long time. I switched to immunosuppressants. I'm on a medication I take every 2 hours that boosts the communication between my nerves and muscles. So just like lots of trying different things to find the right combination. Finally, after 2 years, we found the right combination and things stabilized and my condition is managed and I was able to go back to work part-time. And so that's kind of where I've been since then, since 2017. I've been back at work part-time. I work 24 hours a week, and I would say my condition is stable and managed. And so now my body has changed. It's not what it was, but we've been able to change our lives to kind of fit what I can do, and things are good now.
What did that do that when, again, identity or label, like all of these things are coming at you as you're going through this. How did you make sense of it as a woman in your own mind about like how people see me, how will I be labeled, how do I feel about myself, like all of that? Because I can't imagine where it's sort of like before and after. You weren't disabled and then now you are, and all of these things, and not just the physical, but I can imagine the mental, the spiritual, the
Yeah,
emotional
I kind of
feelings.
lost myself. I lost my sense of self-worth. I kind of lost who I was because I had always felt like a very independent, strong, and confident person. And then all of a sudden, I was extremely vulnerable, extremely, I just needed help for everything. I couldn't contribute the way I used to. And I felt so broken and so sick and so unworthy and so like unlovable. And it was crazy because my husband was so good and he was so loving and my family was so supportive and I had good friends and people were loving me extravagantly. And yet I felt unlovable. I felt like I must be a burden. They're just tolerating me. They must resent this. And then it wasn't until I got back to work and I was still like struggling a lot, but I was there. My coworkers were so supportive. My husband says it's the grand coincidence of my life that I work in the disability field because I went back to work I work at the office, and almost everybody I work with has been a direct care a direct support professional in one of Karis residential locations, and so they
Okay.
all know how to provide physical support to people with disabilities, and so they just very
Yeah.
seamlessly provided support to me. Like on the days I couldn't lift my lunch into the microwave because my hands weren't working, they would put my lunch in and out and carry it to the table for me, and they would help me up off the floor when I bent down and couldn't get back up, or all of these things. So that was really great to just be in such a supportive environment. But one of my colleagues there one day, he asked me, "Would you consider yourself disabled now?" And to be honest, I had not thought about the word in relation to myself at that point yet. I had thought of myself as chronically ill. I
Ah.
felt broken. And chronic illness, I am familiar with because I've had diabetes for 25 years. And so I that was an identity that I already, applied to myself. And so that's how I've been thinking about it. But when he asked, "Would you consider yourself disabled?" Immediately I was like, yes. And it was such a relief because disability has no stigma in my mind. There's no shame in disability. Illness to me felt like a I'm not. It isn't, but it felt to me like a failure, like a brokenness, like something has gone wrong in my body. Whereas disability feels more just like an aspect of diversity. I have
Yeah.
had disabled people in my life, my entire life. My parents had friends with disabilities. They were mentors and caregivers, and I went to church with them and we worshipped alongside. And they worked and had jobs and helped my family out with different things. And I had friends with disabilities that were kids in our school system that were integrated, and I never saw any of them as a burden or resented they were active, vibrant participants in my life. And all the people that I support at Karis Disability Services, same. They're wonderful. I love working with people with disabilities. I never applied that stigma to the phrase disability. So once I realized that I'm disabled, I was like, this is such a relief. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just different than I used to be. And so it was very like empowering. It also gave me
Wow.
the strength to start getting what I needed. So I'd been too embarrassed to get a cane at the beginning, or the different things, because I almost didn't feel entitled to those things. But once I realized, like, no, I'm disabled. I should use a cane. I should get a walker. I should, ask for a disability parking pass. I felt like I had access to all the tools that I could use, and it has improved my life. So now I use a cane, a walker, or a wheelchair, depending on the day and the activity of what I'm doing. I have the tools. I have the mobility devices. It has allowed me to live my life much more fully now. I don't have to miss out on things because I can just sit in my walker, in my wheelchair, and my daughter will push me, and I can go with my family and do activities. Whereas before, I would have been like, "Oh, today's a bad day. I have to stay home. I'm too sick to go out." So that switch from my mind to thinking of myself only as sick to disabled was really empowering for me.
Love that. That is so empowering for me, and I know for others, because again, and I think this is going to be a segue into this disability theology and thought, because what frustrates me is that when we say it feels like, and the sense is it's like less than, it's something wrong or different. I'm just being honest, like I think that's what people think. But I love what you just said. That actually empowered me when I realized that I was disabled. And, I think it's incredible, Karis, like the community, the people that rallied around you, that support you. I think just your way of thinking about things, Jasmine, is so empowering and strong and good for so many people who may think, oh, because I've had some friends that have struggled, and they um, are disabled, and it's been a struggle, and it's an identity issue. It's a deep rooted identity issue struggle.
And
And
I
when I
get
hear this,
that. I get that.
yeah, okay, yeah. And I'm just saying, and so it's like, but to hear this is encouraging. Not everybody's where you are at, but I think it's good to hear you speak this for those that are struggling.
I had the benefit of being immersed in the
Right.
world of disability for years prior, and I think that significantly shaped my thoughts around it. And so then it was an easier transition for me. But yeah, for most people who don't have that opportunity, they don't have the blessing of having a
Yeah.
multitude of disabled people in their lives. It does. Yeah, I understand why it can be scary, and it's something you're not familiar with. So I feel incredibly blessed that
Right.
I had the childhood that I had, and that I had the professional experience that I had. And it was great because I came back to work, and my coworkers knew how to support me, but also the people that we serve, the self-advocates that I work with at Karis, they were so encouraging. And like now when I show up to an event with them and I have my walker, they're thrilled that I have wheels just like them, because they might be in a wheelchair, I have a walker, and I'm thrilled that they have wheels like me, because then I don't stand out. Like
Yes.
we've been able to connect on this new way, and they've been so affirming and accepting of my new reality. It's yeah, I just feel like I've been incredibly blessed to be surrounded by the people I'm surrounded by.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say, Jasmine, is it's key that if you are disabled, that it to really help is to be in a community, is to find community in that way. Are there lots of communities across Canada and North America that people with disabilities can access or be a part of? Or do we need to be better? And I say we, like within churches and communities, to help facilitate or bring in that and open. Like I'm just asking lots of questions in that way. But are there communities, enough communities for everybody, people with disabilities, to be a part of?
Both. So
Okay.
I found a lot of great community online around people with disabilities. There's some great websites and online support groups that really were helpful to me. Themighty.com is one website that's just people sharing their stories and tips, and that was a really
Okay.
great place to start. But then there's also a really good growing movement in churches, especially, and in the Jewish community and the Muslim community and other communities of faith around disability theology. And so there's a lot of study into disability theology and how do we think about disability in terms of our faith, and how does it relate to our kind of belief structures. And so there are conferences and books and research papers all around that, which was also really helpful for me to learn about that. So there is a lot happening, but we also need to do more, because the average church still struggles with that. We don't know what to do. That
Yeah.
that kind of panic of like, we want to, but we don't know how. We want to be inclusive, but we're not sure where to start.
Right.
But I've been so encouraged to see the number of churches that are reaching out and asking, and just starting saying like, we're muddling through this, but we're going to try.
Yeah.
So it is getting better, but I think it's really important for churches. One of the first key questions a church can ask when they're on that journey is, how are we accessible? Not are we accessible, because
How are we accessible?
you can
Okay.
never hit the full 100% accessibility, because every person is going to have slightly different needs.
Right.
So instead, how are we accessible? It gives a posture of continual learning and collaboration with people, as opposed to saying like, yep, we checked that box, we have a ramp, we're accessible. It's more than that. And so it just saying like, how can we be, and what can we do, is a great place to start.
So good. Before we get into more about what advice can you give someone who wants to inspire a more inclusive environment, you touched on, and I mentioned about disability theology. That was when you said that just briefly at our International Women's Day event. I was like, oh, because I'd never heard of that. I didn't know that there was a theology around disability. I'd love for us to chat about that, just what that is, what it means, and how that helps. Because as you said, it's like, there are forms and things in different religions about with disability theology, and how that empowers, encourages those with disabilities. So, yeah, help me understand that disability theology.
Yeah, so I'm not a theologian. That's my first disclaimer.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm a layperson who has been very interested and encouraged by disability theology, and I know a number of disability theologians. So I've been learning from them, and I continue to learn. So I'm lucky that one of my colleagues at Karis, we actually used to work together as direct support professionals back in one of the homes. He now is a theologian who he has his PhD in theology, is Dr. Keith Dow, and he does a lot of our like teaching and researching on disability theology, and I get to work closely with him. So he has a book. It's called Formed Together, so that is a good one if people are looking for it. But yeah, disability theology. The main points that were encouraging to me was first the idea that all people are made in the image of God. It's a very simple concept, but it's very profound, because so much of how many of us were raised in church is the idea that the world was perfect, and then there was the fall, or sin came into the world, and then the world was broken. And the implication being that disability, illness, all of that is a result of the fall, and so it's a brokenness, and it ties it either explicitly or implicitly to sin. And so then there's kind of a shame surrounding disability, and a lot of Christians specifically focus on healing and wanting to like fix it. And so instead of focusing on it through that lens, but thinking we are all made in the image of God, it reframes it to say that like it can be like any other aspect of diversity, right? The more we see different people in the world, the more it helps give us a better picture of who God is, because God is so big. We can never know what God is actually like. But it says, in the beginning, God created man and woman in his image. And so if all people are made in the image of God, that means no matter what our skin color, our gender, our ability, any of that, it's helping give a fuller picture of who God is. And it also means that you are worth, like you have inherent worth just by being you. God created you in his image, whatever you are like. And so you have inherent worth, and you are worthy of love and of being part of his family, and of existing. And so that's what I needed to hear when I was really struggling and feeling broken and unlovable, to realize like, I'm not broken. I'm just different than I used to be, but this can still be part of God's plan, and I'm still loved and created with inherent worth. And yeah, that was really helpful to me. So that's
like,
kind of the foundation that helps me.
Yeah, listen, that theology could change everything. Should change everything.
Yeah, it has
How
a
the
lot of
church-
implications.
It does,
like
because
that,
it's how the church would then see people, how mothers and fathers would see their kids, how we would relate within our own sphere of influence in neighborhoods and communities, where when we look at somebody, it's so weird to me, Jasmine, because it's like, I don't know where this came from, but it's like, this is like the perfect normal person. This is what it looks like. And then anything else different from that is like wrong, is broken. And it's like, where did that come from? Like, where did we formulate that image and look is the ideal? And listen, like, I mean, even for me in my own journey, because I thought there was an ideal, I never measured up. And because I never measured up and I didn't feel worthy, then I did destructive things to make me feel better, because I didn't feel like I was enough. I wasn't the ideal picture of beauty or of skin color, or, it was, and because of that, because I felt less than, I believed lies and made decisions that were very harmful for me and for those around me. But again, that in our head, like, this is the ideal. I don't measure up. I have this, this, and this, therefore. It's so damaging. But what you're saying, it's empowering, enlivening, beautiful, loving. It demonstrates unconditional love and acceptance and no judgment and no shame, but fully worthy and valued as you are.
And then it helps us see verses like Ephesians 2:10, which talks about, for he has prepared good works in advance for you to do. It helps us see that, like, all people, including people with disabilities, God has created good works in advance for them to do, no matter what their disability is. And so it opens this idea of giftedness to us, that instead of looking at somebody's perceived deficits, look at what gifts they have to offer, and how has God called them to serve in his world. And are they fulfilling that, or are we standing in their way and creating barriers? And how can we remove those barriers so that all people can use the gifts that God has given them, whatever they may be? And that's a whole nother talk that I give at churches a lot of times. But it just
for sure, that's amazing, so good. Now, I did mention about advice that you have for someone who wants to have a more inclusive environment, church, workplace, home, community. What would that look like, Jasmine? Like, talking to me, like, what can I do to inspire, to create, to encourage a more inclusive environment where I am?
Start by getting to know the people who are there, and start by not being afraid to talk about disability. And I always say to churches, it'd be great if on your website you list right up front, like, this is a wheelchair accessible space, or even better, if you have accessibility questions, contact and give a specific person's name and contact information, because that lets people know from the outset. Because I'm telling you, if we have disabilities, we're on your website checking out the accessibility before we think about coming. And so it tells people right away, like, we've thought about you and we want you here. And that is a very different message than when you put up the sign saying, all are welcome. That doesn't mean anything. But
sorry, can you say that again? If you have, this is a wheelchair accessible place, like say on a church website, and then you also say if you have questions.
If you have questions about access, or if you have accessibility needs, something like that, please contact, and then have a name and number, because that tells them, like, we know you're out there and we want you in here, and we have a plan to connect with you. Like, you are invited specifically to this space, and we will work with you.
Love it.
Yeah. I think that's the number one thing.
Okay. That's amazing. I'm literally writing notes for that, because I think my church needs to have that. You know what they did? I think one thing about my church I did, and I want to let you know, is because we're trying to be inclusive in the way of, like, with people with disabilities, they cut a number of pews in half, old classic pews, and removed them so that wheelchairs and walkers could come in and not have to feel like they were outside of the pew or have to go to the front or the back. So now wheelchairs and walkers literally come in, and then they sit, and there's all this space. So they literally cut these old pews.
That's awesome.
And within the, like, sanctuary, you see, like, half pews down the way. And
again, that communicates, we want you here, right? And that's the difference between inclusion and belonging. Inclusion is like, well, if you're here, we'll make a space for you, kind of the bare minimum. But belonging is saying, like, we recognize that you might not be here, and we want you here. And so we're going to invite you in, and we're going to, like, find ways to make sure that you belong. You get that deep welcome. You're able to use your gifts. We see you as an equal partner in what we're doing. Please partner with us.
So good. And so start getting to know the people around. And like you said, especially for the church, this is wheelchair accessible. And then, I mean, any other practical things like we can do? Or is it more like you're saying, listen to the needs and then respond? Or, what else could we do, to help?
I think getting to know the people is the first thing, because often people think accessibility means changing a heritage building, adding a ramp, cutting pews in half. Those are sometimes what it is, but sometimes it's very small. Like, there was a woman at a church who said, the lights are a little dim and it's hard for me to maneuver my electric wheelchair out at the end of the service. Could you turn the lights up? Okay. And the pastor was like, yeah, we can do that. So they turned the lights up. And what happened was everybody else started chatting more on their way out of the sanctuary. So it led to more community building and connections, because for her it was an accessibility need, but it actually benefited the entire group,
Right.
with what you want to happen at churches for
Good.
people to talk to each other. So
Yeah.
that was a great example of accessibility that didn't cost anything and didn't take any time. It just was flipping a light switch. And often that's what accessibility is. It's these small, simple, easy fixes. So just being open to the conversations. And so even making announcements from the front, or if you're the leader in a workplace, even saying in your staff meetings, like, hey, if anybody has any access needs, if there's anything that's kind of like being a barrier to you, like, come talk to me. We can try to figure it out. Like, just front end loading that so that you're saying, like, I've thought about this and I want to work with you, so that the burden isn't solely on the person who has the need to say,
Right.
oh, if I bring it up, am I going to be penalized? Is this going to be awkward? Like, you starting the conversation shows that this is a welcoming space, and it shows your willingness to connect, because so much of accessibility is about relationship and connection.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. I literally have like these notes like written every look at my scrawling. So good, Jasmine. Well, I want to get before we end the conversation just the work of Karis Disability Services, because again, like I was saying, are there places that we can access, we can learn, get speakers to come and share at our churches or places. And so, yeah, let's talk a little bit about Karis Disability Services, what they do, their support, and yeah, we'll kind of end the conversation with that.
Yes, so we serve people with developmental disabilities. Our vision is that people with disabilities belong to communities in which their God-given gifts are valued and celebrated.
I love
And
that.
yeah, and so I visualize it as like, I always do. I don't know if you're watching on YouTube, you'd see this, but I have one fist, and on my other hand it wraps around it and like holds onto my fist, and that's my vision of like people with disabilities is the fist, and the hand wrapping around is the communities where they belong. And so a lot of what we do is supporting the people with disabilities. Most of our employees work on that half of the equation, supporting people to get out into the community, to find places, to have jobs, to volunteer, to make connections, to live full lives. We provide services in their homes. Maybe multiple people share a group living environment, or they live in an apartment, and our staff come in and they provide the tangible support that they need to live their daily lives. We also do employment supports, helping people go to college, volunteer in their community, all sorts of things. So that's where most of our employees work. But then there are a number of us on the other side of the equation that are working to equip the communities, so that when people with disabilities come to that church or mosque or synagogue or community center or library or anything, the community space is like welcome, and they wrap around that person and provide that connection. To say, like, we are glad you're here and we are ready for you. And so those are kind of the two halves of what we do. So I work on the half that tries to equip community partners, but there's a whole team of us. So you can definitely go to our website. Our new website will be karis.org, KARIS.org. It's not launched yet. So currently our website is still christianhorizons.org.
Okay.
And if you go there, so I'm saying both because I don't know when. Sometimes people listen to podcasts like months after.
Months, and then yeah, months after, or yeah, exactly. So that's good to know.
But if you go there,
Karis.org.
there is a section of resources for the community or for churches. I'm not sure how it will be labeled, but you can go there and you can download things. There are book recommendations. You can also contact us at the ministry@karis.org if you have a question specifically to your church environment, and we can provide you with sermon outlines or book recommendations or feedback, or we do go and speak at different churches. So you can just contact us and see if there's something we can do for you.
Amazing. Jasmine, this was so rich. You're so good. I learned so much, and I know our listeners did too. I think there's so many takeaways here for me. And thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I so appreciate you. I really do. The work that you
Thanks.
do.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and your story, amazing. So thank you again for being here on our SOS See, Hear, Love Summer Strength series. Thank you. And to you, our listener, we hope that our conversation, my conversation with Jasmine, strengthen you in areas of creating a more inclusive environment at your workplace, home, church, and neighborhood and community. that has strengthened you to help you truly understand that relationships matter the most. As Jasmine kept saying, get to know the people around you. Get to know the people. So, listener, thanks for joining us. And know this, you are not alone, you belong, and you are seen, heard, and deeply loved by God. Bye-bye.